Welcome back. Today we're doing a deep dive into something pretty intense happening right now on the Puerto Rico Senate floor.
Yeah, it revolves around this piece of legislation, Senate Bill 493. PS 493, they're calling it.
And it's about taxes, specifically a tax reform bill. On the surface, it looks like, well, just straightforward relief for homeowners.
It does seem that way initially. It proposes a 100%, a full tax exemption on the profit you make when you sell your main home.
Okay, so that sounds like a good deal.
Well, Senator Ángel Toledo, who's pushing it, certainly thinks so. He argues it's about basic economic justice, giving the average person, access to their home equity.
There's always a but, isn't there?
There is here. Senator Eliezer Molina is strongly against it. He basically sees it as a disaster waiting to happen, even calls it a trap disguised as help. Accelerating displacement, he fears.
Displacement, that's a strong word. So that's the core conflict. Relief versus displacement.
That's the heart of it. So our mission today is really to get into the details of PS 493.
Right, understand how it works, who it affects.
Exactly. And especially look at those exclusions people are talking about. Then we need to analyze these two very different economic arguments being thrown around. It's liquidity versus, well, long-term affordability.
Okay, let's start with the basics then. What exactly does Senator Toledo say this bill does?
It's fundamentally about that 100% tax exemption. If you sell your principal residence, your main home, any gain you make, the profit, is completely tax-free.
Sounds simple enough. So if you bought low, sell high.
That difference, the capital gain, you keep it all. No tax hit.
Yeah.
Toledo really emphasizes this is for the ciudadano de a pie.
The citizen of the street. How should we understand that term?
Yeah, think of it more like the average person, the regular worker, maybe the humble resident, someone whose main asset is their home.
Okay, so it's targeted, but isn't the housing market kind of overheated? Could this just pour fuel on the fire?
That's exactly the concern Molina raises. But the bill does have guardrails, or at least it attempts to.
What are they?
Okay, three main things based on the sources. First, it only applies to your principal residence.
So no vacation homes, no investment properties.
Correct. Second, you, the seller, or your family must have actually lived in the property continuously for at least 2 years within the 5 years right before you sell it.
2 out of the last 5 years. Okay, that stops quick flips, I guess?
Yeah.
Prevents speculation?
That's the intention. It's trying to prevent people from just buying, holding briefly, and selling for a tax-free profit without it ever really being their home. Burying the state, as one senator put it.
Okay, and you mentioned 3 points. What's the third and maybe the most politically charged one?
Yes. This is critical. The bill explicitly states this exemption does not apply to properties bought under Law 20 or Law 22.
Which are now often just called Law 60, right?
Exactly, Law 60. And you really need to understand the context here. Law 60 provides huge tax breaks, near total exemptions sometimes, mainly to wealthy individuals, often from outside Puerto Rico, who move to the island.
And it's become really controversial, seen by many as driving up prices and causing displacement.
Precisely. So, by specifically excluding Law 60 beneficiaries from this new tax break, Senator Toledo is trying to send a very clear message.
What message is that?
That this bill, PS 493, is meant for the local long-term resident, the average person, not for the wealthy newcomers benefiting from Law 60.
Okay, that exclusion is doing a lot of political work then. It's framing the bill as for us, not for them.
Absolutely. It's central to the argument that this is about helping the ciudadano de a pie.
So let's use that example again. You buy a house for $100,000. Years later, it's your primary home. You've lived there, and you sell it for $300,000.
Under this bill, that $200,000 gain, the profit, it's completely tax-free, zero tax owed on it.
That's a significant amount of cash landing in someone's pocket, completely unencumbered by taxes.
And that's Toledo's point. It gives the average worker, the homeowner, real financial flexibility. Maybe they retire, maybe they buy a slightly better home, maybe start a business.
But that's where the narrative splits, right? Because Senator Molina steps in and basically says, hold on, this isn't help, it's actually harmful.
Exactly. He calls it a disparate, which translates roughly to nonsense or an absurdity. He thinks the potential negative consequences, especially given the current market, just swamp any good intentions.
So what's the core danger Molina sees? Why is giving people tax-free cash from their home sale a trap right now?
His argument centers on the current economic reality. He says, okay, fine, you encourage the humble resident, the middle-class person, to sell their home and pocket that tax-free gain. Great. But then what?
Where do they go?
Precisely. He points to the intense inflation, the incredibly high home values right now, driven, he'd argue, partly by those very Law 60 investors, and says there's simply nowhere affordable left for the average family to buy.
He gave some pretty stark examples in the debate, didn't he?
He did. He painted a picture. You sell your modest family home for, say, $200,000. You keep that gain tax-free, fantastic. But then you look around for a replacement. And even in areas that weren't traditionally super expensive, like Dorado Beach or Rio Grande were mentioned, a comparable replacement might cost $600,000, maybe $700,000.
Wow. So the tax-free gain, even if it's substantial, just gets swallowed by the price difference for the next place.
That's his point. The math just doesn't work for the average person. The tax saving is nice, but it doesn't bridge that enormous gap between the old home's value and the new home's cost.
So the result, in his view?
The homeowner's forced out. They sell, take the cash because it's tempting and tax-free, but then they realize they can't afford to buy back into the market anywhere reasonable.
And the ultimate outcome he fears?
That they're forced to leave Puerto Rico altogether. He literally said the legislature is encouraging people to sell your house and get out, pushing them out of our country once more.
That's a powerful accusation.
Yeah.
And he didn't just stick to housing, did he? He connected this to broader issues.
No, he really broadened the frame. He argued this housing issue is just one symptom of a much deeper structural crisis.
What kind of crisis?
He talked about fundamental infrastructure problems, the energy grid, water distribution systems, the roads. He claimed they're still in worse shape than right after Hurricane Maria hit.
Which is saying something.
It is. And he mentioned there's apparently $30 billion in federal funds available for infrastructure repair. His point was, why are we passing tax bills that might encourage people to leave instead of using that money to fix the fundamental systems that make life livable and, support a real economy?
So fix the foundations first?
That's the essence of it. He sees this bill as benefiting mainly, maybe only, the banking and insurance sectors because it boosts transaction volume.
Not the average person trying to find a place to live.
Right, and this ties into his whole economic philosophy, which is really different from Toledo's.
How so?
Molina argues that real sustainable economic growth doesn't come from just shuffling assets around, like houses changing hands more often. It comes from making things, manufacturing, production.
Like building material.
Exactly. He specifically mentioned controlling the costs of essential materials, cement, blocks, steel, lumber. That's where he sees real value creation, not just in the financial activity around housing sales.
So he sees the high sales volume now not as a sign of health, but maybe a bubble.
Very much so. He thinks it's just a financial symptom, not true economic strength. He even threw out a suggestion.
What was that?
He said if the government really wants to use tax breaks to encourage property buying, maybe they should target the 6 million Puerto Ricans currently living off the island?
To incentivize them to come back.
Yes. Encourage them to return and buy property, bring their capital and skills back. He argues that makes more sense than a policy that might, inadvertently or not, push current residents out.
That's a totally different approach, using tax policy to attract returnees, rather than just easing the exit for current owners.
It reframes the goal entirely, and he voiced this deeper concern that just focusing on boosting transactions, which helps banks and insurers, might just be, in his words, preparing the field for issuing more public debt.
Echoes of past financial crises, perhaps.
That seemed to be the implication, a fear of repeating mistakes where financial activity got prioritized over, real structural economic health.
Okay, so that's a powerful critique. How did Senator Toledo respond? He had to defend the bill against these charges, especially the displacement argument and the connection Molina kept making to Law 60, even with the exclusion.
Toledo came back strong. His first point was basically to say Molina was either missing the point or perhaps deliberately ignoring the facts.
Specifically, the Law 60 exclusion.
Yes, he really hammered that point home. He insisted that because Law 60 beneficiaries are excluded, the bill cannot be seen as benefiting those wealthy investors.
So he's saying Molina is conflating two different issues.
That's his argument. He maintained the bill is squarely aimed at the humble resident, the average local homeowner, and that Molina was confusing a measure designed for their financial freedom with the controversial investor incentives of Law 60.
Which brings us to that core concept Toledo emphasized: freedom, or discretion, as he put it.
Exactly. Toledo framed this whole thing as being about individual liberty. It's about giving the average citizen the right, the discretion, to access the value locked in their single biggest asset, their home, tax-free.
And what they do with that cash is their business.
That's the idea. Whether they use it to buy a more expensive house, downsize and bank the cash, move to a different area, start a small business. Toledo argues that choice should be theirs, free from government taxation on the Jane.
And he positioned opposition to this as what?
As basically wanting the government to keep taking money out of people's pocket. He literally said opposing the bill means they want them to keep putting their hands in your pocket, taxing the gain that people earned through their home equity over years.
So a fundamental right to your own property's appreciation, tax-free.
That's the philosophical underpinning of his defense. And importantly, he directly challenged Molina's entire economic premise.
How so? Molina said housing transactions aren't real growth.
And Toledo said, yes, they absolutely are. He explicitly stated that increased property sales and the construction activity that often goes with it, demanding rebar, cement, other manufactured goods, these are standard accepted indicators of economic activity.
So he sees construction and sales not as a bubble, but as signs of life.
Signs of a growing and vibrant economy, in his words. He connects that activity directly back to the manufacturing Molina wants to prioritize. It's all linked, in Toledo's view.
And empowering the individual homeowner to cash out tax-free contributes to that vibrancy.
He believes so. He argues the bill defends the worker by protecting the gain they realized on their primary asset, and it's not some kind of instrument of deceit, as Molina implied.
So he's essentially betting that the power of that individual liquidity, maybe that $200,000 tax-free gain we talked about, is strong enough.
Strong enough to overcome the market challenges Molina highlighted.
Yes.
Strong enough to allow homeowners to navigate their next steps successfully, whatever those might be.
It's a significant bet, really. It assumes individual financial empowerment is the primary driver, maybe even regardless of the broader market conditions or infrastructure issues.
It definitely rests on that assumption. Give people control over their capital tax-free, and good things will follow for them and the economy. That's the core belief.
Okay, let's try to synthesize this for you, the listener. We've heard both sides. The fundamental tension seems to be this classic policy tug-of-war. Individual liquidity versus systemic affordability.
Absolutely. And it plays out in how they interpret the current market. What do those high sales numbers actually mean?
Right. Molina's perspective, let's call it perspective A.
Perspective A sees those high sales figures not as growth, but as a danger sign. An inflationary bubble symptom fueled partly by outside investment that's actively leading to displacement for locals.
And he brought up historical precedent for that fear.
He did. He explicitly referenced the financial collapse around 2004 in Puerto Rico. He reminded everyone about the housing boom back then.
What happened then? Why is it relevant now?
Well, it was a period of massive construction, heavily fueled by bank lending, some say speculative lending. They built way too many houses.
More than people could buy.
Exactly. It led to a huge inventory glut, a market crash, and ultimately required a massive bailout from the U.S. government because the banks were overextended and people couldn't afford the homes or just didn't want them in that market.
So Molina sees parallels. He fears today's high transaction volume, even with this tax break, could be the start of another cycle like that.
It seems so. Another situation where financial activity, benefiting banks perhaps, takes precedence over building a stable, productive economy, potentially leading to a crash or displacement.
Okay, and then perspective B, which is Senator Toledo's view.
Perspective B looks at the same high sales figures and says, no, this is evidence of a vibrant economy. It's capitalism working, people are investing, building, selling.
And the tax break.
It's just about basic democratic liberty, protecting an individual's capital gains on their primary asset from government interference. It's seen as fundamentally fair and pro-growth.
So much hinges on those protective clauses we discussed earlier.
Everything hinges on them, really. That 2 out of 5 year occupancy rule, and especially the explicit exclusion of Law 60 investors.
The question is, are they enough? Will they really ensure this benefit only goes to the intended group, the existing local middle-class resident?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? Toledo insists, yes, it's tightly targeted. Molina fears that the sheer incentive to sell that 100% tax-free gain is so powerful
that it will just flood the market with more houses.
Exactly. More supply hitting a market where demand is already inflated, potentially accelerating the very displacement of the middle class the bill claims to help. It's a real gamble on how market forces will play out.
This whole debate really throws into sharp relief a challenge policymakers face everywhere, not just in Puerto Rico.
For sure. How do you design tax policy to help the middle class maybe unlock the equity in their biggest asset without unintentionally making the broader housing crisis worse?
Making it harder for the next generation or even for them to afford a home.
Right. You don't want the policy that gives someone a tax break when they sell to be the reason they can't afford to buy again. It's that trade-off between helping the individual liquidate and ensuring the overall market remains somewhat stable and affordable.
It's giving a huge benefit on the way out of the market, but you have to consider the market they're re-entering, right?
Precisely. If that tax saving just gets instantly vaporized by higher prices for the next home or rent or just the cost of living, then who really benefited? Did the policy actually achieve its goal for that average person?
Which leads us to a final, maybe provocative thought for you to mull over. Senator Molina kept bringing up the failing infrastructure, energy, water, roads, arguing that is the real crisis needing investment.
The foundational issues.
So if this bill, PS 493, passes, and it provides 100% tax relief on potentially very large capital gains, that's revenue the government won't be collecting.
A potentially significant amount depending on market activity.
So the question is, does a policy focused on individual capital gain protection, however well-intentioned, inherently help, or does it potentially hinder solving those deep structural economic crises, especially if the lost revenue isn't directly replaced or reinvested into fixing that essential infrastructure?
Yeah, what's the priority? Do you fix the roads, the power grid first, creating a stable base, or do you give individuals more financial freedom first, hoping that stimulates activity? Which path leads to more lasting economic stability?
A tough question with no easy answers. Definitely something to think about.
Indeed, especially when the stakes involve people's homes and the island's economic future.
And that concludes our deep dive for today.